I'll let the attendees know really quick though. For those of you attending virtually, Councilmember Morgenstern and staff, we're having significant audio issues over here, so hopefully you can hear the meeting. If not, unfortunately, there's nothing I'm able to do on our end. So we're gonna start. Just wanted you to be aware that audio might be disturbed throughout this presentation. All right, Chair, whenever you're ready.
All right, we will call the meeting to order at 1:43. Thank you all for coming to the Finance and Police Subcommittee meeting. We'll start with a roll call. Myself, and we'll work our way around the room, let everyone introduce themselves and who they're representing. I'll start with myself. I'm Todd Lands. I'm the current mayor.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody. I'm David Kelly, City Manager.
Kevin Thompson, Assistant City Manager.
Jean Batman, Concerned Citizen.
Rich Schwab, owner of the Seven Palms. Richard Battles, we live in the Briarwood.
Kathy Storm,
Concerned Citizen.
Rick Thomas, I own Briarwood.
82 Bedford.
Daniel Frankston, Cloverdale resident.
Terry Guevara, Cloverdale, Lombard.
Robert Weiss, Cloverdale, we got the trees, right?
Who we going to Cloverdale, Lombard?
In Solo, I'm with WMA and Western American Housing Community Association, an association in California that works with mobile home park owners and operators.
Alex Long, City Attorney.
Chris Parker, Chief of Police. Gus Wall for the City Council.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Moving on to public comments. To totally speak, any item that's not listed on our agenda at this time. Is there anyone here for any other reasons they'd like to speak? Seeing none, move on to approval of minutes from last meeting.
So, actually, Mayor, there's no minutes on the agenda.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, next meeting we'll have a few.
The open up to new business. We're going to go to E1 discussion, mobile home rent control ordinance.
Mayor and Chair, if I can, I'll start and then I'm going to turn it over for a formal discussion presentation by our City Attorney, Alex Vaughn. Just a little bit of background on how we got here today. It really initiated with a member of the community coming forward at a council meeting inquiring about rent control. And they were asking within mobile home parks, and they were asking about the applicable rental rate increases that were approved by the city under our current Cloverdale Municipal Code, Chapter 5.36, which provides for rent control in mobile home parks and establishes a regulatory scheme for addressing rent increases. At the time when the individual came up, we addressed his concerns under public comment, which not only provides for 3 minutes of public comment, but we followed up with the individual who was expressing concern about rate increases at the mobile home park in which his mother resides, and inquired about the status of approval of past rate space increases. And upon further research of our Muni Code, we determined that the city has not enforced the ordinance that was put in place in early 1986, but there were subsequent rate increases by the park owners. What we determined was that what was placed within the municipal code was actually fairly restrictive in that park owners were only allowed to increase rent spaces if they petitioned the city and went before a rent review board. And since we had not practiced that in the past, because the code language was determined to be somewhat outdated, it was necessary to look at rewriting or updating our code to address, the particularly changes in law and to be more consistent with the county's practices. We've seen across the county a number of cities, including Sonoma County, update their mobile home rent control ordinances. to address the, the ongoing need around maintaining affordability, but also preserving the opportunity for property owners to obtain a reasonable rate of return on their investment. So that's kind of how we started this process. At the first meeting of the Finance, Admin, and Police Subcommittee in February, our city attorney presented various options, policy options to this committee to receive their feedback and input. And we're going to review those again today. Ultimately, the policy recommendations that were made at the February subcommittee meeting were forwarded to council for further review and consideration. Those have to do with the allowable rent increase, vacancy control, the rent review body, as well as the date for determination of the base rate. At the February council meeting, council heard from the community that additional input was needed on some of those key policy provisions before we brought forward an ordinance. I think in particular, the park owners were concerned about some of the policy points, but likewise, so were some of the residents. And the council directed staff to do some outreach to both park owners as well as residents. We coordinated a notice, and we tried our best to make sure that the three owners were notified of this meeting today, so we could be present, and noting that the three owners, the three park owners or parks are represented by their owners. And again, the intent is to get additional input and feedback as we draft an ordinance to bring forward and bring back to council for their consideration. So this was kind of the start of a process that was reflective of community input about rate space rents at mobile home parks that necessitated us to kind of to look at our current code and our current regulations, and ultimately the desire to update to reflect the kind of the current environment, the current regulatory environment, the current business environment. And so that kind of just sets the stage why we're here today, is to talk about what are the key policy points to really update. And what we would consider or recommending is kind of update and replace the current language with the new language once we've gotten clear policy direction from council.
Yes. May I ask a quick question? David, the individual that came in front of the city council to express his concern of the public comment, was he a resident in the city or outside the city?
I'm not sure of his disposition, but his mother is a tenant within one of the mobile home parks. Okay. So I think he was really speaking on behalf of his mother, who was on a fixed income and was concerned about the potential rate increases in the future.
At this point, I'll turn over to
Yeah,
Alex.
at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Alex. He'll give you a little bit more background. That was just kind of, how did we get here today?
And just to add one thing to David's background about policy decisions today. At the very first meeting of the subcommittee back in November, the question was, do you want to have rent control or not? And at that time, there was a desire, yes, we want it. If the committee or the council has changed their mind, I mean, that's of course something that body can do. We would just at that point then recommend we repeal chapter 5.36, just so there isn't confusion about what it is. So rent control is legal. It's well established that it's legal, but it has to allow for park owners or apartment building owners in that circumstance to make a fair and reasonable. And so part of the problem with our existing ordinance that hasn't been enforced is that it doesn't allow a rent increase unless you go through this process, and just a big sort of mess. So that's what we're here today to talk about, some options move forward with the rent control ordinance. I'm sure everyone in this room knows, but Mobile homes are a lot different than apartment units in that, in general, the resident owns the unit, but is renting the space that the unit is located on. And although we call these mobile homes, they are very much not mobile in most circumstances. And another thing just to touch base on is a lot of what we talked about today, we're comparing ourselves to other cities in Sonoma County. Most cities in Sonoma County and the county itself have rent control ordinances, and they differ, but they're very similar in many ways. And the reason we came to you with just these four main issues, those are some sort of immediate issues that people tend to want to get feedback on. There'll be time to look at a draft ordinance too, if that's how the council wants to go forward, but you're be talking about little details in which not these overall large issues. So the first topic is the allowable rent increase. And so the way that most rent control ordinances work is they allow park owner to automatically increase the rent every year by a certain threshold. So you might have it be a flat percentage, you might have it be a percentage of CPI, you might have it be some other formulation. So in the staff report, we have a chart of what all the other cities in Sonoma County do. I would say the most common thing is that they say you can do either 4% increase per year or 70% of CPI, whichever is greater. So if CPI was 10% 1 year, 70% of that would be 7%. In that case, we have to do 4, would be the 4%. If CPI is very low, you get something that's less than 4%. Is what you're allowed. And those are allowed automatically by right every year, once a year, would be allowed to do that increase. Separate from that, if a park owner felt they weren't receiving a fair return, maybe their expenses had grown a lot in a particular year, or they had a lot of tenants who weren't paying their rent, and so they weren't making their expected revenue. There would be a process that we'll talk about later for them to apply to get a special rent increase to ensure they are getting a fair return. But that normal allowable increase of commonly 4% or 70% of CPI, that's automatic. There's no justification of parking that we need to do. So that's the first topic. The second topic is vacancy control. So vacancy control is whether or not when a new tenant moves in, you're allowed to, or a new resident moves into a mobile home space, you're allowed to increase the rent more than what it otherwise would. So in the context of apartment buildings, state law says you can't have vacancy control, that the owner of an apartment building is allowed by right to increase the rent to whatever they want. Those same rules don't apply for mobile home parks, and so a mobile home, the ordinance could allow vacancy control or not. And we could do some combination of it if you want. So we could have no vacancy control at all. You could have something where you allow them to increase rent more than that 4% limit, but not however much they want. Maybe you say 10 or 15% or something. Or you might have vacancy control only in certain circumstances. So there are a couple cities that say, after an eviction, you can't have vacancy control because there might be a thought that you want to discourage eviction, using evictions as a reason to. Or a lot of cities, not a lot, but some cities will also say there's vacancy control for in-place transfers for certain people. So if you're selling your unit to or transferring it to your son or your daughter or your spouse, that there can't be a rent increase there, but there could be for other circumstances. So that's left up to something to decide on. A couple of things to keep in mind. Talk about vacancy control. Rent. Some people look at that and they say it's important to make sure this stays as an affordable unit. If we're able to increase the rent a lot, this won't stay an affordable. But counter to that, some people will believe that you have two units, and one of them has a $5 drop in, other one has a $1,000 a month rent, someone is going to be willing to pay a lot more for that unit, to buy that mobile home that's on that rent control spot. And so it doesn't really make the unit more affordable, it just transfers the price from the monthly rent to what you're willing to pay for the unit. So those are two competing arguments that people raise sometimes. And another thing that consideration for vacancy control that's sometimes raised is that we talked about how park owners are entitled to a fair return. And so if you allow a park to go up to market or whatever they want when a new unit comes in, that allows them to make revenue from those new residents who go in there knowing what their rent will be. So they're not surprised by a high rent increase. They're going there knowing what their fee. And that means they'll have less justification for possibly a fair return increase because they'll be getting that revenue. And that may or may not be good because when you go for a fair return, let's say you aren't making that money, you go for a fair return. That fair return, if let's say you go through the process and it's determined the park owner is entitled to $25 more a month. That would apply to all spaces equally, not just new spaces. So some people see vacancy decontrol allowing it to go up to market. Some people view that as a way of actually helping existing tenants make sure their rents are low, helping them board. The next topic is the rent review body. So fair return hearings, and we talked about that process. Well, who decides? Who's the decision maker there? You want someone neutral, neutral and independent. So when it comes to that, that would be some third party. And there's a couple different ways to do that. In big cities like San Francisco and Oakland, you see they have separate boards, sometimes elected. I would say, frankly, that's a bad idea, and it can be a mess, and it becomes, even if everyone has good intentions, those folks just don't have the financial background you need to look at someone's records and determine whether or not they're making fair. Another option is that the city manager would just appoint an independent third party to do this. And there are a lot of, people out there who specialize in serving as these types of hearing officers. So you could get someone who's experience. And the third option that many cities in Sonoma kind of take advantage of is they contract with the Community Development Commission, and the Community Development Commission sort of handles that whole process and appoints. They will do the intake and they will appoint hearing officer. I'll be a little frank that that was something we were interested in doing. We've had some difficulty getting some, the mission has not been extremely responsive, I'll say. So we think it might be good if we move forward with ordinance to maybe suggest that as the sort of default method, but that the city manager can appoint, if we're not able to get a hold of them or they're not available, that the city manager could appoint a third party officer. Because I know one concern we have had that we haven't been able to get a clear answer on from the CDC is, would those proceedings have to take place in Santa Rosa at your offices, or could someone come up here? If we reserve this room, for example, could you come do it up here? So it's convenient for residents in the park. And then the last thing is the date for the determination of the base rent. So you get an allowable increase every year. Let's say it's 4% or 70% CPI. Well, what is that on top of? What is base rent? And so we need the date to determine what the base rent is. And in some communities, you've seen, the council will set that base rent date in the past. And because they want to discourage, park owners, not saying it would happen here, but discourage park owners that maybe know that this, ordinance is coming, so maybe they jack up their rent, in anticipation. So some cities have backdated, a little bit. And when we talked at the last committee meeting back in February, there was the thought, well, maybe we'll just go back to, January 1st for a month or two in the past. And then that would be the base rent date, and a park owner could do a 4% increase, or whatever the number is we settle on top of that. If it's important to note, if the rent has increased in the interim period, that's fine. That's legal rent. There's no need to refund that or anything like that. It's just going forward, you need to decrease the rent so it complies with whatever the ordinance is. So those were the four main topics we talked about. There was also a desire for potential land use protections for mobile home parks, and I think the committee and both of the council decided that's something that will be handled on separate track. So that's not something we're asking for any feedback on right now. It's not something that's going to be pursued like now, maybe in the future, but right now that's. So that was the four main topics. Of course, if the direction from the subcommittee is, we don't want to do the same one, that's close, something you want to know and pass it on to them.
Great. Chair, if I can, just add a few details. I think there's been a lot of information that's been shared to the council and this subcommittee by way of the city attorney in his presentation. But for the benefit of the group here today, just want to make sure we reflected the research that went into this analysis. And there's been a lot of work done at the county and various cities on updating their rent control ordinances relative to mobile home parks. So the most current review of rental rate provisions includes every city in Sonoma County except Healdsburg. Petaluma is their rent increase cap is 4% or 70% of the consumer price index, whichever is less. Santa Rosa is also 4% or 70% of CPI. Windsor is 4% or 75% of CPI. So you see a little difference there. Sebastopol is 3%, so they have somewhat of a higher or maybe a lower ceiling is the way to look at it, or 75% of CPI. Roder Park is 4% or 0.5% less than the percentage increase in the CPI, whichever is less. Sonoma County is 4% or 70% of CPI. Cotati is 6% or 100% of CPI, whichever is less. You can see they have somewhat of a higher ceiling. And then Sonoma is 80% of CPI. The recommendation after considering this subcommittee was 3% or 75% of CPI, whichever is less. So again, they're just based on review of the rent increase caps that are provided by the other cities. We're kind of we're in alignment with Sebastopol, but again, there's some flexibility there. So anyways, I just want to kind of get the survey data available to the community on those. What other jurisdictions in Sonoma County are currently found within their municipal codes.
Could I raise a point of order? There was one thing that you forgot, and that is that the cities will have a percentage of bump on turnover. Do you have those? Because I didn't see it on the document, and I didn't hear it. But Santa Rosa is 10% turnover on, or 10% increase on sale of the home on turnover.
Okay. That's good.
But in the other cities have different amounts, and it goes up to 15%. One of the cities, I think it.
Yeah, they all average between 5 and 15%.
Yeah.
That's on that. Yes.
On the vacancy.
That's an important component.
Absolutely.
Sorry, that's on sale.
Hold on, sir.
Yes, it's only on sale.
So, listen, guys, listen, this meeting I have to keep it organized. I can't just have people talking. So please go through me okay. You go Briarwood, so why don't we start with the launch first? If you guys say your piece and then we'll go to the people who live there. Yes, sir.
Thanks. What you're saying is upon sale of that particular home, that it's a 10% increase in rent.
So with the vacancy control, is the vacancy control with the spot. And so when someone moves out, you can, most of them, they're all between 5%, 15% increase on that spot is how they control it. So say someone moves out of that spot and a new trailer is coming in.
No, that's not a new trailer. That's only on the sale. With the unit vacates, it's a
A
different.
new person in that trailer, sorry. Is that more clear? Yeah, new person in that trailer. They can raise it between 5 and 15 depending on where you're at.
Right, okay,
On top of your 4% or 70%.
right, whatever that.
Whatever it may be. Councilman Walter.
Just, Alex, a couple of quick questions. So, the CPIs usually come out in, August, I believe.
So they measure CPI every month, and then they also have a CPI, for almost every month, and then they also have an annual CPI that compares the annual for 2020, the annual to 2020, no road stuff. So, you know, we might, if we're saying January is the base rent, we might say, you know, we'll look at the change between December to December, or the annual to the annual.
Okay.
We can decide.
So we would decide whether it's going to be annual or whenever the
Yeah,
lease comes.
and we can pick something, maybe if folks have feedback, you know, sometimes looking at one is a little higher than the other. December to December may be higher or lower than the annual, sort of no glamour reason for that. But we would specify exactly what it was, so, you know, confusion.
And then secondly, special assessments. If I'm a park owner and I decide I'm going to pay the roadways, could I charge a special assessment that doesn't affect the lot rate?
Yeah. So there's a couple ways to handle this. That report briefly touches on. So we could, what's pretty common is if you might say in the ordinance, if you're doing something new, you know, you're going to build in a swimming pool that doesn't exist. You can't charge residents for that unless you get approval from sort of 50% plus. If it's sort of a replacement or a maintenance item of something that's existing, you can recover that cost generally, but there are different ways to handle it. Some will just say that's just part of running the business, so make that part of your fair return application if you think it's not necessary. Or you might have a separate application process for that to get that approved, to justify it as being necessary and to show, yes, our roof is really actually leaking on this main building, that sort of thing. We got in quotes and we keep this up. And then the ordinance might specify a limit on what could get passed through to 100%, if it's 75%.
And that's, I would imagine that's a whole different subject as far as, you know, was the maintenance on that main unit of that clubhouse neglected over the
Right, and so normally what you will see is something they have to show when they're fined for that is that it's, you know, they did the proper routine, which is not, you know, you could take great care of your roof and eventually it's gonna need to be replaced. But just so you sort of show that you take it.
You know, Gus, can I respond?
No, I'm gonna give other people a chance first, and I'll bring it back to you. Are you done? You own 7 homes, correct?
I do.
Okay, do you want a chance to speak before I go back around?
He is going to be speaking for me, but I'd like the opportunity to kind of augment that. But I also have to be at a appointment that I had with UCSF. So I have to leave by 3 o'clock. Okay.
you want to speak before I pass it around again, or?
Well, sure, I guess I'll just focus on two things. I think your staff has done a great job of giving you the research. Most of the cities in the county itself that have updated their ordinance over the past year and a half, WMA has participated in that process, and some have done better than others. And what you see now in the environment in those cities is a result of how that process took place and how the communication between park owners and residents in the city developed through that process and what the relationship is now. So essentially my plea to you guys is to keep that line of communication open with these park owners, because when that shuts down, the situation is really nasty, really quick. You happen to have really great park owners in the city that have already been in the business for many, many years, who aren't in the development business. They're in the owning and management of a park business. That's what they do, and that's all that they do. I would say that if the city wants to follow the trend of all the other cities in other county of going and updating or creating a new ordinance, that we would want to be a part of that process, and we'd obviously suggest not doing that and sort of being different and being more open-minded and more creative. There are other ways of doing this. Our association had and park owners have participated in a process that involves contract negotiations, memorandums of understanding between park owners, residents, and cities. They're a lot more friendly to all parties, but it takes more meetings of the mind, more meetings like these, where park owners and residents can tell each other what their main priorities are, and as a result, you see MOUs where the parks aren't as squeezed as hard on their ability to maintain their infrastructure, and at the same time, residents are given even more benefits than they're given normally, because it was a commitment that park owners made out of their through the MOU. It's not something that can be done through an ordinance, right? So that's a possibility. If you guys are open to doing something like that, we'd love to help you in that process. Now, if you're going to the ordinance route, I'd really lean strongly on what your staff has already mentioned about vacancy decontrol. I'd suggest that it's, it looks like you guys are aiming for that low cap of 3%, which you think is really low. And bringing anything below 100% of CPI, we believe is the race to the bottom eventually, because anytime you tell a business that they can't keep up with inflation, that bill comes due at some point or another. What we're telling you, and I think what through your letters that you've received and through testimony of other park owners, is that valve, that safety valve for that bill coming due is vacancy decontrol, because when park owners can reset to market rate, what you're going to see is in jurisdictions where park owners are able to reset to market rate, there are going to be very few fair rate of return hearings, because that is how park owners are able to catch up, and they're able to come close to where the market is, and the new residents know what they're signing up to. It protects current residents while also giving park owners the ability to maintain their infrastructure without going through separate process, which your staff will say, will concur with me, costs a lot of money to do these other processes. So with that said, if the lower you go, say you go 50% of increase or 20% or 15% increase, like a lot of the cities in the county have done, you're going to see more fair rate of return increases. If you go with no vacancy decontrol, I fear you're then stepping in a situation like what Petaluma did, where the situation is very toxic. Park owners are forced to go to court because the safety valve is no longer there. I know that folks will say the safety valve is the fair rate of return hearings. That's not the case. Fair rate of return hearings are super expensive for everybody else, everybody involved. And once you're in that process, the control over what happens is completely out of your hands. It's out of your guys' hands. It's a third party arbitrator. If the park owner originally asked for $35 increase, he could present so much evidence that the arbitrator gives him $100 increase, and there's nothing that the park owner, that you guys, or the residents can do. It just suggests that in a smaller city like this, you guys are able to do a meeting of the minds like this and not have a nasty situation like what happened. Really heavily lean on the ability of the operators and the owners to have that safety valve resetting to full market rate on turnover. So full vacancy decontrol would be our full suggestion as you go forward on, if you go through an ordinance.
Sir.
So just brought up the point about the pass-throughs and adjust for certain items like a roof replacement, repaving. And my experience with that subject is that it's, nobody likes it. And we went through that at Briarwood, and it wasn't, let's say it wasn't satisfactory for anyone. Maybe this agent, the mediator, was happy because he got a job out of it. But what I've been doing is using, pretty much match the Santa Rosa rent control process. Whatever their rent adjustment program is, I use that in Briarwood, and I have been for a number of years. So technically it's had rent control there. And what, you know, this letter, the city got from this attorney, it brings up subjects that are actually imputing, because of other conduct in other parks and other locations, that it possibly could happen in Cloverdale. And thus the city's ordinance that you've come up with is attempting to remedy things that haven't taken place. The process of doing that is in itself an implication of some wrongdoing by the park owners. And I object to this process going down that road. And I would want to see a different approach here, not like in Petaluma or Santa Rosa where it's adversarial. And if you look at the subject of rent, it's maybe a paragraph. Rent control is one paragraph. And yet there's 10, 12 pages of rent control. Well, what's that? It's not rent control, it's control. And it's control to prevent park owners from doing terrible things to their customers. Well, that implies that that would be done without this ordinance. Well, there's no examples of that in Cloverdale right now. They would be here. There aren't. What I think the opportunity here is for Cloverdale to do something different than what's going on everywhere else, which is the other cities are great for lawyers. You know, what they're doing is wonderful for lawyers. Not so much for park owners and some, you know, most of the tenants. And I think that that's what I object to most is an ordinance which interferes with my relationship with my customers. And the language that in the ordinance by the preventions of all kinds of terrible things that to stop a park owner from doing to their customers, well, I don't think it's necessary. There is a state civil code, which is 30 pages. And the state of California regulates the conduct between a park owner and the park tenants. 30 pages of rights that tenants have. So with a simple, component of rent control, of just being a goal of guidelines of not raising rents that are, too drastic, is something that I think that would be the way that Cloverdale should go. I don't think it needs to lay the hammer down with the power of the city right now when it's not needed.
Would you like a chance to do that?
Yeah, just a few things. On that fifth generation from the county. I bought this property about 7 years ago. we've been very diligent about keeping it in accordance with what the prices should be. We haven't gouged anybody. And about 50% of our tenants are still on leases. That will eventually burn off. But right now, about 50% are on leases, so they will be immediately affected by this. But I put a solar panel in, made it the lot nicer on the road, better for the environment. And if you've seen it 5 years ago versus 10 years ago versus today, you see it's really clean up. And we're just looking for fair return and not to have vacancy control with that completely out. That might be a situation where it's just still on one side. And so, thank you.
Thank you. I hate to keep asking all the questions, but, Alex, I know, Briarwood, for example, and correct me if I'm wrong, each one of those tenants pay, the city directly for their water based on a meter. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what about the mobile home parks that include that in the rent? How do you distinguish between that? If they're paying their water directly to the city, should the increase be as high as somebody who pays for their water? Or are we just getting too deep into control?
So if, it's part, if you just pay flat rate to your park owner and they take care of all the utilities, that's your rent, that flat amount that you pay them. Now, if the water rates are going up a lot, and suddenly they're going up more than CPI and they're going up a lot, that park owner may no longer be making a fair return because they can't pass on that cost, so they have to go, request a special rent increase to pay for that. If it's a separate thing that park owners, that a resident pays the city directly for, that's separate and they'll continue to pay, separate in that rent amount, is unimpacted by those.
And then, Mr. Mayor, just one more question. How long have you owned Briarwood now?
My family's owned it since the mid-70s.
Yeah. So, and the point I'm making is, I know you're a fair landlord because we don't really receive complaints from your tenants. So I'm really interested in hearing what you and your fellow park owners would like to see this document look like. What can you live with, as opposed to us dictating to you what we would like to see? Because quite frankly, I don't know your profit margins right now. And I don't know whether your tenants feel that it's a little too high. So I'm really interested in hearing what you think about it and what your fellow property owners think about it. Now, you own 7 Palms, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And did you put those shade structures over the parking lot?
I did put my own money in.
Yeah, and that was really good. Is there solar in those?
That was the whole purpose.
Yeah.
Well, dual purpose.
Yeah.
And it looks nicer, much nicer.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's indicative of a property owner who cares about his property. So I commend you for doing that. So that's it. I'll be quiet for a while.
No, Councilmember Walter, you bring up a good point. One of my questions that I had was, you talked about 4% or 100% of CPI type of thought process. Am I right? Something along those lines, like, what you thought was fair if we were going to talk about it. That's what I wrote down.
Well, I was just going off of what your staff is suggesting, 3 or 7.
I'm just trying to kind of get a ballpark.
We're always going to advocate for 100% of CPI. The cap, whether it's 3 or 4, is quite frankly not going to be the hill that we choose to die on. It's more that 100% CPI versus 75, and really that vacancy control resetting.
And then you said you used Santa Rosa's rates approximately.
Yes, and it was the formula was a 6% cap, 100% of CPI, and it's a 10% on turnover. The And we just went through a process, and we went back 20 years. The average CPI, the average over 20 years was 2.6%, and we worked within it. There was a fair rate of return process available. We never applied for it. We were able to manage within the budget we had, and that's what we preferred to do. And we may have been able to pass through the $400,000 remodel of the clubhouse, but we didn't. We chose to just fund it and capitalize it out, because again, we didn't want to disrupt the people that live there. And when you do insert a fair rate of return hearing or a application for reimbursement for a item that you do some work on, it's disruption, and people don't like that. And that's not good it's not a way to really manage a community. So we try to minimize these kind of impacts upon our communities and so we do. And but 2.6% was the average. So I think we hit 5.7%. And that was just in the last 2 years. But then the 4% kicked in. I think one time there was a 5.7, that was it in 20 years, but it averaged out at 2.6%. And that's with a 6% cap. So it was never used, but it was there for us if we needed it. And
I'm sorry, wait, is there more?
one other thing. I will work on a concept of what I would think would be a good rent control program, or a whatever you want to call, or we'll just call it a rent control ordinance that would be good for everybody. I'd work on it with Vincent's law and get a copy to you.
You want to talk about yours at all, or how you establish it?
We're Cloverdale Mobile Park. And I like what I'm hearing here with the other two parks, and would be happy to sit with them and talk about how we can put something together that, because we've always been well under, maybe just look at our rental rate.
Yeah.
So
then let me ask one more question before I turn it over to the renters in the room, if you don't mind. If you have a spot that can't be rented, what do you guys do? Like, for instance, if there was one that it was for sale right now, the trailer was like $250,000, but it had $1,000 spot rental, and next door was a trailer that was for sale for $150,000 or $250,000, but it had a $400 spot rental. That one of the $1,000 spot rental won't sell, and the value of it will actually decrease.
The prices will fluctuate, so what we want in the non-rent control area will sell for more. We've got a Luma, the non-rent control units were selling for $75,000.
So you're saying basically,
yeah,
the sell out.
That, as your staff suggested, that increase goes to the price of the unit that they're buying rather than rent.
And the reason I bring that up is because we have one here in town. It's been sitting on the market for months. Yet you can't find a single place to live here in Cloverdale, period. And so I'm like, why does that sit? Is it because it's not worth what they're asking? Is it because the space is too high? I don't know. That's why I'm kind of bringing the question up to you guys.
Is it in my part?
I'm not going to front anybody off. I wasn't going to say that, but yes, it is. And if they put in a new trailer there or cleaned it up, whatever they did, and it looks real nice, it's for sale, and it's.
Wait, that's my unit you're talking about?
Yes, sir. I wasn't going to say it was yours.
No, it's sold.
Really?
Yes.
As of when?
As of
That's out for sale a couple days ago.
let's see, last Thursday.
And that kind of defeats the purpose of my question. Yeah, it's sat for a long time, and that was why I was like, what's the reason?
Well, the reason for that one is it was at the higher end it was the highest priced unit that was has ever sold in Briarwood. but it was only $30,000 more than a used home, which I put in 10 years ago. So a 10-year-old home sold for 220,000. And this is a brand new one, and it sold for 30,000 more, brand new with a factory warranty.
Right.
So, but it was in escrow in November, but the person, ironically, the person, the hours were cut, and all of a sudden he didn't qualify for the loan anymore. So fortunately, it didn't close escrow.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Interest rates have gone up. Everything carrying that one too.
Yeah, but it is, you know, it did have a lot of people wanted it. It's again, a new home. The process of getting the space clear, which the state has changed. Now, all mobile home parks aren't the same. Briarwood is what you call a ground level entry park. The front half of the home is surrounded by a retaining wall, and it's a ground brought up. The state has just updated their code on these type of communities, and they require engineered retaining walls and drainage systems. And I just did one in Santa Rosa, and the engineering was $7,400 just for a mobile home, and that's just for to get the permit. So, and then there was a point, can't forget Salo made it. It was, I wanted to, it was Todd, you brought up and now I can't remember what it was.
When you think about it, I'll pass it around to the other people in the room for a little bit and see if we can come up with.
Did you lock the rate in for a length of time, or was it only for a year? A night with it?
What's that? The question?
Did you lock the lot rate for a period of time because of the amount that they were paying for the mobile home?
Well, what I did was, yes, it's fixed until July 1st of 2024, not 25. But the reasoning there's some new state laws that actually control rents that you can only, and my attorney believes that it covers mobile home parks. And that is, you can't raise the rent more than once in a 12-month period of time. And so this was a rent increase because of just the new turnover. And so that's another reason I didn't want it to stumble into a violation. So there will be no increase again this year.
Again,
I have a question if you mind. I'm curious about the 30,000, the used mobile home that sold for $30,000. I know that the one that just sold is $1,550 per month. Can you tell me how much the rent was on the one that sold for $30,000 less than you told? I'm just curious to get an idea as to whether or not the price of the rent affects how much it affects the purchase.
What is 1,550?
I believe that's the one that you just put escrow just for.
no, I thought it was like 1025 or something like that on the
Was 1125.
yeah.
Oh, okay. I apologize. And what is the other one? You know,
I don't remember, but it's probably around 1,000.
okay. I'm trying to understand the difference. And, you know, let me just say at the outset, I really appreciate the input from everyone because I think it's important that we all work together. I want to commend you. I live across the street from Briarwood, and I think for a mobile home park, I think it's excellently maintained. And I think it's in good shape, and I appreciate that. I do have signatures that I'd like to turn into the city clerk. I'm getting from about 50 citizens of Cloverdale who are in support of putting protections on increases in rent control for mobile home parks. I've been a tenant right attorney in San Francisco for 20 years before I moved here. I believe that rent control is important so that people have assurances as to what they're not going to be going down the road. And for that reason, I'm in favor of allowing the vacant units to come to market once they're vacant. I don't favor, I do believe that rent control should be imposed on vacant units, maybe a 10% cap. So too with transfers, there should be a cap of no more than 10%. But when a space becomes vacant, then at that point, that allows the owners to bring the price of that up to the market, and that will help for the other tenants that remain there to keep them from having to deal with pass-throughs and increases. So I would be supportive of no vacancy control for empty units. With regards to the other major item, which is how additional increases are to be applied for, I agree with what Alex had mentioned, which is having the CDC take care of it, but also permitting the city manager to the extent necessary to work outside of that. I think that would be very helpful. And the last thing, I realize we're going to put the zoning overlay off to another date because that's part of planning, to go through planning and whatnot. So but I think that pretty much sums up where I stand on it. I think that one thing that I think is really important is that when notices do get sent out, that the residents be notified that there are protections that are afforded them under the city of Cloverdale. And if nothing else, we'll just have a tagline and a rent increase that says the rents are controlled by the city, and you can get additional information from the website. Go to the website to find out what the CDC is. And lastly, with regards to the effective date, I would suggest that it should be a CPI of 60 days before whatever effective date is in place. So if we go with January 1st, then I would say take the November 1st CPI measure. That allows the landlords to actually calculate out what the new rent is going to be in order to give them a notice, which if it's going to take effect on January 1st, that's about December. So using November for the CPI date or 60 days prior to whatever the effective date would be best.
Thank you. Anyone on the side? It's separate.
Well, I think that's a good example of what happens when you get too many words on the ordinance. You end up with a whole bunch of people that are interpreting those words and creating disharmony in our communities. And that's one thing that I am most concerned about with this process in Cloverdale is, and I'm going to be very protective of that. And anybody or any system that presents something that I believe is going to create disharmony in my community, I have an attorney, and he's going to help me minimize that disharmony.
One last thing, I've been on and off in real estate for almost 50 years and we've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of properties. And when vacancy control hits, it just kills the potential income. And it also creates a situation where the owners can't afford it. Do a whole lot of property management and without improvements. But thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other comments? Councilor Walt, we want to start by giving you type of opinion more you think here.
Well, my suggestion is we take them one at a time and then open it up for comment on it and then bring it back to the dais for our final moving forward instructions. So
Justin and I were saying, would we agree? I would say no vacancy control. Start there. Would you agree with me?
so you're saying no capital, no 10% cap or anything?
I am. No. Vacancy control and turnover increase are different, correct? As I understand it. So somebody moves out and it stays, then it can be raised 10%. If gutted, then the lot we brought up to rate. Is that accurate?
Yeah, people sometimes use the term vacancy control to mean different things, but if you just want to specify, we can make sure it reflects here.
Gotcha. So when I say no vacancy control, what I mean is if I move my trailer out and leave you with your lot and the park owner has the right to bring it up to market rate at that point,
That's what would you agree with that, or?
I would.
And then the 10%, the turnover,
Change of ownership.
change of ownership is a 10%. That's what I have written down. Is I'm coming out listening. These are the things that I come up with that are seem like middle ground to me. Is that one you would agree with?
I would.
With those two, do I have any
Yeah,
comments?
question, so if somebody, let's say, has a tenant moves out, dies. Okay, I'm gonna try to replace that tenant, correct? Should that tenant not, or should I not be able to get a full amount for that spot that somebody died in?
Are you removing the trailer and putting another one back in that spot, or is it just the tenant?
Just the tenant,
It's a 10% increase is what I'm saying. What
I don't have to say anything.
well, they don't even have to die. What if somebody moves out and another person moves in? You want to bring it up to market rate at that point?
I do want to bring up the market.
I'm against that myself.
So
I'm here to hear from all of you to argue, to debate with me. You know,
So
we're here.
here's what will happen. I will then say, fine, I'll get, as this person dies, get rid of the spot, bring a new spot in. And a person's gonna have to pay a lot more because he's gotta buy a whole brand new thing. Versus somebody who's looking for affordable housing can say, hey, we still pay the same rent that most everybody else in the park is gonna do. And have, versus having to pay more to get an expensive trailer for whatever it costs. Then it's gonna make it difficult for people to get back in because of that, because they have to spend so much money. I just did a situation where it was completely trashed. And I gave it to the tenant, the person who lived next door, who wanted to fix it, did all the plumbing, everything. Did everything themselves. And it didn't cost them nearly what it would for a new coach. And that's why I think it's a benefit that you're not doing the way that automatically, just because somebody dies or moves out or whatever, it just doesn't seem fair.
But what Vince brought up, it outlines some of the unknown qualities or situations that arise in mobile home parks. And that is the mobile home, it is a home, but it's classified as personal property. And so there's a whole different body of law that comes into play. With that, there's also a mind frame of people that are in the mobile homes, and they view them differently when, and in the situation that he just mentioned, the homes get, they deteriorate and they depreciate, but many of them are not maintained, and some of the maintenance is substantial. And so what with the condition that he was working within now, what it allows us to do is a little bit more free contract negotiations with people and circumstances, which would be the vacancy decontrol on a turnover. Well, he's able to, this home is garbage. And yes, there are people that'll move into that home and they'll do a really good job rehabbing it and make it a habitable dwelling again. But they'd rather buy the thing for $4,000 or nothing even, and put the sweat equity into it and then pay the higher market rate rent. Currently, that's an option that is without the vacancy control. When there's the vacancy control on a unit selling, well, that is impacted. It will be impacted. It may not stop it, and maybe it would just adjust the values and valuations, what everybody is working with. And, you know, but I think that's where the 15% on a turnover comes into play. And I've been, you know, we have a rent control, it's called the market. And so nobody is really active at identifying what is the market rate value for that product. And I've worked on theories myself, and it's a percentage, I believe it's a percentage of apartment rent. Or it's a percentage of that, not 100%. But I believe it's somewhere around 60 to 70%. And so if that was determined, then it would be possible a cap on the market rate rent on turnover. That's a potential, but I would, you know, think that a 15% on a turnover with full vacancy control on the sale or the vacation of if the unit is removed. But also there's another component, which is that I think the city will have a problem with controlling the rent on the space with an eviction. And so that I'm hearing the city attorney, what was potentially a full, which was rent control, even with an eviction. And I believe that's illegal. I believe the state law trumps the city's position on that. And so and it doesn't make sense. The state controls what you can evict somebody on. And to say that, you know, the eviction, what's going to cause somebody to be evicted? I've got one archive box full, and the police department's got 130 police calls to one house. And I couldn't evict them. So we're not going to just start evicting people. It's not done. And it's not necessary, I guess what I'm saying.
Thank you. Do you want to talk about this at all, or?
No, we're just exchanging them.
I do. I would just like to just wrap up a little bit of what Rick just said, because I think he was, in other words, exactly where I was headed, which is, I think it's a good suggestion that you made of full vacancy decontrol when a unit is, replaced, because that incentivizes the park owners to if they're on the fence on whether or not to replace a unit. I think that gives them the incentive to do that. I would suggest more what Rick said, more like 15 on otherwise. If it's just going from one tenant to another, remember that the new tenant understands exactly what the rent is. They're not in the same boat as the tenant that has been there for 20 years and just left, right? And then I would suggest to you that what some of, there's a lot of ordinances in California. Some of what I've seen for you guys to play with, some ideas on this is that some cities have suggested that I do think what Rick said about the eviction does create problems that you guys probably don't necessarily want to deal with, but there are other ways that you can show to the residents and to the tenants that you're trying to protect them. For example, the in-place transfers is what they're called. We just did this in Windsor last year. When there's an in-place transfer, somebody's moving from one unit in a park to another. For example, they just want to upgrade their home in the same park. You could lock in that rent and say, no, you can't increase. No vacancy control now. Just full lock in. You can only increase it by what it would have been in the first place, at 4% or 3%, whatever you guys decide. That's one of the most creative ones that I've seen that really does protect those residents that are there already, right? Which I think, in what I hear, a lot of cities and counties say that's their main goal, is to protect the current residents. So I think you're on the right path. And if you're asking me what I would suggest to you in a paper right now would be 100% of CPI, 4% cap, full vacancy decontrol on those, unit replacements, 50% on turnover, that is not unit replacements, that's just, new tenant, and then just block altogether on in-place transfer, so that if you're upgrading within the park, your rate is locked in.
So, thank you for
Sure.
That would put us at the second highest of everything in the county. That's what that puts us. I'm just saying.
No,
That's where I expect you to start, so I love it.
I think you could be even better, but
No,
that's the place I think that
I would
gives you a little line.
And, we all have their thoughts on what we should do. I can say right now, we should make the ordinance that we have and let it settle itself, but I'm not gonna go that route. Just saying that.
Well,
Just to add, one thing. I've heard people say sold and transferred and those can sometimes mean different things. So, this might just make everything more complicated, but like, if you want to give your unit to your child, or, maybe you have a roommate and you want want to give it to them when you got, like, is that something that would trigger and allow that 15% increase being allowed or not? It's just something for the committee to think about whether they want, just so we address that issue.
well, it becomes a legal action. And if the title transfers, that is what you would determine, what is determined on what is a transfer? Well, it's title transfer. And there's also, tied in with that, the state law requires the homeowner in a mobile home park to have title, to have a rental agreement, and to reside in the park. And the problem if there's a gray area created with that, there's a problem with the concept of subletting. And that then totally negates rent control, because a trailer will rent for more than a trailer will rent for apartment rents. So if they start subletting these trailers, the rent control's gone. So it's in my part, we don't allow subletting. There's a new state law that has conditions that may allow it. And what I've experienced is 100% of mobile home tenants that sublet their homes, the home is eventually abandoned because of the damage to the home that ends up happening and the illegal problems. And so when the state allowed and mandated that tenants and trailer owners have the right to sublet if the owner of the property is renting the homes. They have no idea that what they did is they just allowed a park owner the ability to eliminate the units because they're going to be damaged, and there's going to be legal problems that non-landlords are going to run into. And the home isn't worth the legal costs that are going to take place. What I would like to see is this rent control ordinance that you would come up with be limited to 2 pages. I know it sounds goofy, but the less words in there, the less disharmony that'll be created between the parks and the tenants and the city. It's my opinion.
Thank you.
I could do that.
Thank you.
I could do that. 10% increase.
So even under any type of title transfer whatsoever, they can bring it back to the title. Not using now just over 15%, if you're all into.
I don't see the need for it.
Rick, right?
Yes,
I think he said Rick does about 10% already, so it's, you know, I mean, 15% is the high, on the high end of the county.
Yeah, but I don't see the need for it. I think it's only looking to the situation.
Awesome. No vacancy control on any title transfer or removal of the trailer, any type of, how about under evictions? Nothing evictions as well.
No, I don't think on the transfer we should do anything. It should just forward market. And that will spread amongst the other rent payers, I think.
And how about when you think about CPI and the 3 or 4% that people are doing?
Yeah.
On average here, now Catawba's is 6%.
Yeah.
That's the one that's different.
Well, Rick said in his line in Santa Rosa, he's never gone above 5, was it?
yeah, well, we never went above 6 when it was 6.
Yeah.
And it's a 2%, 2.6% average over the last 2 years.
Yes.
I'd be comfortable with 4 or 5%.
So 4% for what, like 100% CPI or 70% CPI?
70% is CPI,
And you want whichever one's higher, or whichever one's lower.
whichever one is higher.
I believe it's how they're using it is whichever's lower.
Right, and that's why I'm asking that question
And
because.
so,
You can set it up however you want, whichever's higher, whichever's lower.
yeah,
So, we can, but the difference is you're going to get a higher percentage of, say, whichever one's more. Because it's either 4% or 100% of CPI or 70% of CPI. So if CPI came in at, 9%, then that would be higher than your 4%. So you get more than 4%, but you can still be under CPI. And I think that keeps you more with the market myself. I think that when they say whichever is less, the gap, it starts to get further apart.
It's CPI is
that's
normally
right.
3-4%. Last couple of years, it was 7 and 8%. That was a fluke. The normal, I think, is about 3%, 4%.
And see, I would, if you're asking me on mine, I'd say 3% or 100% of CPI. Because that would keep you above CPI barely for the average. But if CPI had these huge jumps, flukes like we had, then it gives that ability.
We think that's clean.
we actually were, that was our, for decades, that was our formula in our lease, which was exempt from rent control. It was a 6% cap and it was a 3% minimum. And it averaged out, it worked.
I'd like to hear what Daniel has to say. I think everybody else has left, so.
I really think the whole purpose of having mobile home rent control, keep the occupants, residents, keep their rents low. So I'm with the mayor here with the 3%, which is 3 and
3 and 100% of CPI, whichever's higher. Oh, I'm sorry, 70%, 70%. Sorry, that was.
And I would agree with that. I would also, I agree with everyone on no vacancy when you have empty split market rate. I vehemently, and I'd be curious, would you be willing to share what sort of vacancies, how often are there vacant spaces where the mobile home comes out? I'm trying to get an idea. Does it happen often? Is it a rare occurrence?
Those are two different questions. When there's a vacancy and when a mobile home comes out are two different.
No, when there's an empty slip.
So
Where someone removes the trailer, he puts them.
that's much rarer than when there's just a turnover on the ownership of that unit, right?
Right.
The one unit will be owned by many.
Like in Briarwood, how many in the past 10 years, how many do you think have moved out of your place and had a new trailer put in?
Six.
6 and 10 years.
20.
20 years? 6 and 20 years.
It's rare.
I mean, the turnover. I'm just trying to get an idea.
Well, you don't live in a mobile home park.
Correct. No, but I'm trying to understand.
Well, why are you, giving, opinions of what my income should be?
I'm not,
Everybody in the community has that right. That's why we're here.
In general, the turnover in the industry is about 5 to 7% on a yearly basis. So if you're just in terms of going in and out, but like you said, the unit being removed is much more rare.
And the only reason we're asking Rick is you're the only one that's here right now. It has nothing to do about your part.
Yeah, I think there's-
You're the last one standing here,
It's
so.
all good.
Sir, you got a
Yeah, I just want to see if I can get a terminology change a little bit. In 2020, we moved up to our new home to us. And we brought our motorcycles up here in a trailer. You get my question? We live in a home, and it's something I had to deal with when we first moved up here myself, what I was calling where we lived. But to me, it is a full-blown home. Sure it is. And to decipher it from Del Webb across the street, you would have to refer to it maybe as a home. But it's certainly not a trailer.
Right.
So just,
absolutely, no, you're right. Thank you.
And I think what we're talking about now, doesn't really affect well, it does to some extent affect the current residents, which is what I'm concerned about. I think, when it goes to a sale or a transfer, I think the park owners have to bring it up to market rate. So I do agree with you on that, Daniel. And Rick, Daniel has been, helping folks, on different issues. He's an attorney. He moved to Cloverdale, about 5 years ago? 3 years. 3 years. And, he's just a concerned citizen that wants to get his input into the.
And he's done it for how many years have you been and for working for control? 20? More than 20. So a lot of knowledge. So we have to, I like to listen to him as well. I learned, I haven't been about 3 minutes into this myself, so.
And also what works in a big city doesn't work in a small town. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that the best way to work things out is person to person, across the table, et cetera. But unfortunately, the law requires put things in place to deal with situations where people can't work them out amongst themselves. So
Well, we have been working things out, and now you're here, and now there's this, whole, like, pages and pages of accusations that aren't true.
I don't know the accusations, I don't know the pages they refer to.
I'm referring to all the theoretical things that you.
Really quick, we got a couple of conversations going on at the same time. We can. That's okay. It's just not able to keep up with the two.
Did that answer your question? First question?
Yeah, and when I heard there is that you want 3% or 70% of CPI, whichever is higher. It's what the two of you agreed upon.
You know, Gus,
Yes, sir.
we did when we did the accounting for the 20, we came up with 22.6% average over the 20 years.
Yeah.
We looked also at the CPI and what the CPI did with our expenses, and our expenses over the 20 years increased at a greater rate than the CPI average. At 100% of CPI, we are falling behind. And we had 100% of CPI. The CPI didn't keep up with the actual cost of inflation for operations. And we had a 6% cap and 100% of CPI with a 10% on turnover. That's the only thing that kept us really viable. But we were going behind on the CPI. So I really think that a 15% with 100% of CPI and a cap of 6%. I think that and then the vacancy decontrol should just comply with the state law.
Can we understand where would the 15% come in from?
On resale of the trailer in the park. When somebody transfers the title to the home, that's the turnover. And it should be, I think, 15% up to a market.
But Well, we're suggesting no cap on that. It's that amount.
Even better.
I think what we're talking about in terms of vacancy control is specific to the space rent. So there's no provisions, as I understand, Alex, to address the sale of the unit, and there's no restrictions on that. It's just in the instance where you transfer to a family member.
Well, not necessarily, you could be selling it to someone, or you could be transferring it to a family member for money or for not. What I heard from the two of you was, whether the unit's there, whether it's not, you can raise it however much you want, the part owner. But there'd be no cap.
That part becomes a lot more important if you guys go below 100% CPI. If it's 100%.
Well, and that was, sorry, that was one of my questions.
Yeah.
What's more important?
It's like a balance, right?
So let me ask you this. With no vacancy control, and you see where we're going with this. I mean, I'm open for the 100% CPI. I'm open for no vacancy control, period. Which one is more important if you had to choose one?
No vacancy control.
Easy. I think that was way too fast, way too easy. I love it. Thank you. So that solved it for me. So we're sitting here now. Let's see if we're on the same boat. 3%, 70% CPI, no vacancy control.
Yeah, and
That's what everyone here has said is where they want to be.
So could you repeat that?
3% or 70% CPI, whichever is higher. So if you have these huge influxes of CPI, you can keep closer in that gap.
Mhm. Yeah,
And then you'd have no vacancy control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that sound, Gus, does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
And it sounds like, Daniel, how does that fare with, like, if you were on it for renters' rights without having, since no one really showed up, and if you did?
Well, I would obviously argue that it should be the lower of the two, just because you never know what CPI would be. I mean, bottom line is, back in the 80s, we had 18% CPI. That's, hopefully that never happens, but to the extent it does, the two. And then I would go back and encourage you to look at the in-place transfer. A lot of times it's husband and wife, kids, et cetera. So there's really no vacancy. The occupants remain the same, but the owners are different. And to put a 15% burden on that doesn't seem appropriate, especially when there's no cost that's being absorbed by the park owner. It's one thing when you got a vacant slip and maybe now they're going to go and repave it and redo it and they've got a planning tenant, understood. But I think for purposes of keeping rents affordable for people that are most vulnerable.
So you're thinking something along the lines of no increases with in-family transfers.
That would certainly
Same as DMV.
that would certainly be a compromise. I would encourage, I believe the last time there was somewhere between 5 and 15, I thought 10 was a good compromise for in-place transfers. And I would stand by that. Again, I hear 15, I would say, well, I'm also going to be in favor of 5, but for the purpose of the trying to get resolved, I think 10% would be better. Certainly, if there's going to be a cumulative transfer, I would say there should be no increase. So if you're going to kind of split it that way, when I say no increase, and then maybe 10% for in-place transfers that are not really.
well, there's a mechanical problem with that, and that would be and I've seen the families are big enough and there's enough people where there would never be a trigger an in-place transfer. They could just transfer it within the family. And how do you prove that it's not family? And literally there would, it would never exist. That would then but eliminate that provision of the formula. So it's got to be title transfer period.
Well, then if that's the case, then I'd say keep it at 10% in title transfer. And that way, the people that familiar transfers will kind of lose out, because
That's based on what you do currently.
Yes,
It's 10%.
it is. And I've been doing it for
So the 10% would only be on inter transfer.
sales, but on basically transfer the title.
Yeah. Hold on, because now I got confused, Rick, with what you just added.
Yes.
And also because, is it Daniel?
Yes.
I think Daniel mentioned in-place transfers and then this issue with family sales. So in-place transfers is understood in the industry as when somebody moves from one unit in the park to another. Right, so whether they just pick up their mobile home and move it to another space, which doesn't happen very often, or if they just move to another unit that already exists in that. And that, as an industry, we've been very accepting of there no being any increase on those transfers.
No, that's not what we mean by in-place transfers. What we mean is the trailer doesn't move, family moves out, new family moves in.
Yeah.
With the title transfer.
That, what the Daniel suggestion, the family, I think that you're, how far separated?
That.
How far, oh, you're removing
I'm
that?
not talking about that part. We agree, I agree with Rick. I think I saw, so I guess say, yeah,
Okay.
that makes sense.
So not
So
that
it's
family
more of-
stuff. So it's full vacancy
Trailers,
control.
so let's say right now, I have a friend right now in your trailer park. Mom passed, daughter inherited and moved in. So with that, we set it to where it stays at 10%. You know, it's
So where does the full vacancy decontrol come in?
full vacancy.
No, the vacancy decontrol that you spoke of at the beginning, because you said 3%, 70% of CPI, vacancy decontrol, right?
Correct.
Well, he's talking about family member to family member.
No, not anymore. We removed.
No, it's changed. It's now it's a kind of a new.
Well, because he just asked me what's the most important to
Right.
us, and I think to you, Rick, is the full vacancy decontrol is the most important, right?
It is.
Yes. To all park owners, full vacancy decontrol is the most important.
Like right now, Rick is family sells and the new family moves in.
Mhm.
He's going approximately 10%.
Well, that's what I've been doing.
Well, that's Rick, and I can understand, but I represent more than Rick,
I
so.
know.
Most park owners would say, no, we were much more on the side of being able to continue to have full vacancy decontrol, because if you're going from 100% of CPI to 70% of CPI, that's a big gap. That's a third of the income, right? You have to have a full reset to market on transfer of units. If you set that at 10%, then we're getting into that situation. Then your ordinance is looking a lot like Petaluma. And I know you guys are getting late. I just feel like it's complicating, Rick, and I feel like the situation of familial transfers really doesn't happen that often. And the most important is full vacancy decontrol, Rick. Really is to
And
everyone.
100% of CPI, which.
Well, they asked me what's more important, 100%
Oh,
CPI
okay.
or full vacancy decontrol. Maybe to Rick, it's 100% of CPI. To the owners that I've spoken to outside of Rick, it's full vacancy decontrol, right? So I don't know, Rick, to you, is it 100% of CPI or vacancy decontrol?
It's full vacancy decontrol on when the home's removed or there's an eviction.
Yeah,
And
that's what we're
that's how-
talking about. That's what we're talking
That's how it is.
But I think we cut off the conversation there because it's getting too complicated. And I think they have to get going.
Well, I'm trying to simplify what I'm trying to do. Is make it to where no matter what happens, you have the same raise or not. And that's where the no vacancy control came in.
Sure.
And that's how CPI or that, because it's one or the other, because it's going to be, we're going to set it, in my eyes,
Right.
I wanted to say either we're setting a 10% limit or we go 70% CPI.
That's right.
And that's where I was trying to
I think we're on the same page.
basically negotiating before it even comes out of my mouth to you guys. What I was trying to do.
I think we're on the same page on that until I think we got to that last.
And I know that-
opinions.
And I know that what you're saying will benefit the park owners financially more at this point. And that's okay. I'm not against it, but at least it's setting some limits to some point.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't accept those limits.
We have to think of the tenant too.
No, absolutely.
And so, that's why when you told me what you wanted, I'm a good place to start on your,
Yeah, totally.
our salesman's gonna sell it for 40, I'm gonna ask for 20. You know, it's the way it works.
I understand I'm not gonna get everything I want. That, to
And I
me,
think that
that's
what we're offering, yeah, I think that, you know, having the 3%, having 70% of CPI, I think that's on the lower end of the rest of the county. But the no vacancy control completely is a good trade-off for negotiation. Alex, I mean, how does this sound about, and you do a lot of this as well, so I think that we're hitting good on both ends and make it fair. And then if we get into this and all of a sudden we start getting 900 complaints, well, we can talk about it, but you know, we haven't had them at this point. We've only had a couple, and it's, where are you at, Daniel? I want to, you know, 3% or 70% CPI, that keeps it pretty low.
Well, if it's the lesser of the two, that would be true. But I would still encourage you to, still put a cap of 10% on transfers. I think it's, otherwise the price would just gonna go through the roof. To the extent that they become vacant, that's a different story, bring it up to market, but when it's a transfer, I think that 10% cap is more than enough. The owners are not incurring any additional expense for transfer, so I would encourage you to stick with the 10%.
So we see transfers, we mean in place transfer.
Correct, with a mobile home. So whether it's a family member or whether it's a third party.
No, see, that's when we get, you can't say that, because then you start getting into the family member, how far removed family member. An in-home place transfer is a very specific thing. It's when somebody moves from one unit to another. We're happy to give away on that. But when you say the family member thing,
Okay,
it's complicated.
let me just say that the in-place transfer is the sale of a mobile home that remains in its place. And that way, it doesn't matter whether it's.
No, see, I think you're misunderstanding. We've already decided that, at least as far as we're concerned, that that's 100%, right?
But he's saying it was something like that, we should be at 10%.
Oh, so you're saying, okay, fair.
I'm listening because he.
I know, forgive me, I thought you were just, misunderstanding. I'm misunderstanding, please.
Yeah, no. So it would just be if a mobile home is sold, the new buyer would be subject to 10%.
Got it.
Whether it's a sister, the mother, or a third party.
Got it.
And Rick, when we say market rate, you do a credit bureau check on the individuals that want to rent.
Yeah,
And is there like a percentage that you allow to go towards rent? How do you figure that?
well, it's, I don't know if there is, it's a guideline of 30%, or 33% of gross income shouldn't be housing. Or is the maximum of 33%.
So I just want to know if you've got a unit that's not renting or a lot, to lower the price.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we put a lot of effort into pricing our product at the right price. Including our.
Thank you guys for doing this.
Absolutely.
Most people don't do this.
So I'll stay away. I think the direction's good. And
Okay.
tell me if I'm right or wrong. So Alex, can you help us bring it forward? Either be 3% or 70% of CPI, whichever is higher. Is that correct? They want to word it.
Right.
And then no vacancy control, period.
Yep.
Is there anything else?
Did we capture that right?
The last thing, that's on the list is
The base rent dates?
Yeah, they,
So the dates, I think that we should set a calendar, whether it's January or July 1. One of the, it's either January or July 1.
It's got to be January 1 of 2020,
24. And then what date do you want the CPI to be done from?
I think annual.
Okay. Do you want it to be a January 1 CPI, or do you want it to be like Daniel said?
The CPI,
One CPI.
the annual CPI comes out in August, I believe.
well, so they do an annual to annual index measure. I think it will get released in sometime January 17th, I'd say. And then park owners believe it's 90 days, they have to give notice, so that would mean, April 1st is when those would be. I mean, they could wait too, they might decide, hey, for their books, they want to be on July 1, or each, person might be different. But one other thing, just because park owner mentioned that they have existing leases, so under state law, if you had a long-term lease, those were exempt from local rental ordinances. That no longer applies for any leases entered into after, I think, March 1st, 2020, or around the start of COVID. I don't know if that's something you wanted to allow, create that as an exemption in the city for long-term leases if the park owner wants to work out something and the tenant is willing. You want that or not, or that's just complicated?
I think that they should be allowed to. That's on them. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I don't like all the control. I have minimal control in my eyes. I'm even having a hard time sitting here with this, so.
The state law controls the park.
Well, that's the thing is California is so governed, it's ridiculous, in my opinion. And now we're gonna get into personal, so I'm gonna stop. However, with that said, I think that minimal control is all we need. And if at best, I would say if they set up a long-term lease, that exempts them from any of this.
And by the way, that's January 1st of 2025 is when that starts, that law starts.
No, yeah, but we're talking,
The long-term lease law.
And so with CPI, I think we started January 1, we use an annual one if it comes out. Because it came out, seems like there's one in.
you get you, they just go to security.
They can tell you every year what the CPI is month to month. And then they'll also look at a whole year of 2020 versus a whole year of 2023. So what's the annual of that change? And I know, like, Social Security, you might base theirs off of the month, the August to August, or you see in some of our ordinances, they might say, some of our fees are based off of like June to June, because that's when we adopt our fees to get updated in June. So we base it off of that.
Yeah, and I think the number comes out with CPI in August, but it's based on 630's numbers.
Yeah, so then should we say based off of the August release CPI so that it gives?
No, I think we just have to say the annual CPI.
It comes out monthly, I believe.
Yeah, it does, but there's also an annual one that comes out.
What I'm wondering is how do we give them enough time? If it's a January 1 date that they're changing their rate increases.
We don't,
And they need 90 days. So
They need 90 days.
October, November, December, so it'd have to be something in August.
So I
they
also
can
imagine
later than
what you're doing is you're saying for the next 12-month period, like this is the maximum you can raise it because, if the tenant moves in October, they're not going to be able to raise it again in January. They're going to have to wait until the next October. So everyone's going to be on a different schedule. So you're saying for the 12 months, what you can do is raise it off of this.
So I'm arguing, I'm arguing. Got it.
You guys can use the whatever Sonoma County. That would be a nice suggestion.
What we do for,
Well, I think the direction we're giving city staff and city attorney is to, you heard what we had to say, now see what it looks like in a memo form and bring it back. So,
We'll work on that, and if there's a date that works best so that it fits an ordinance, we'll shoot that one, but it's gonna be the same basically. That's it.
And then I guess the last question is, does your committee want this to kind of sort back to the council in the memo format? Here's the direction. Do you want us to move forward like this, or do you want full ordinance to go to the council based on the direction from staff? This is
I want full ordinance brought in. Right?
to the full
The
council.
whole council.
2 pages.
Good luck with that.
Number 8 font. 6 font.
That's what I completely understand the reasoning for it, but you get like, if you ever go to that fair return hearing, you need to have like detailed definitions so that you have a certain.
Okay, 3 pages.
0.6.
We used to do the summary. We used 2 pages just in the recital.
They'll send you a copy and read it.
What was it, 5.5?
Very
Just eliminated it altogether. The full city council may decide they don't want to do that.
Or a modification of the ordinance that presented, is that?
Always, that's always, but it's not, so it's not with two choices. The good thing about that is the council can choose anything at that point. However, if you come with a couple options, it makes it speed the process along.
Or else we'd be hashing over the same thing.
Absolutely. All right, good direction. Thank you guys for your partnership. Appreciate it. We're trying to do it great. All right, let's get on the next steps here. Town hall meetings.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, Chair. The item in this item in your packet is kind of a memo and a set of agendas and a list of topics for potential town hall meetings. The council has expressed a desire to conduct town hall meetings. Town hall meetings are typically serve as a forum to receive community feedback on issues or matters or important policy considerations that is currently before the council or to help guide future decision making. I outlined a couple of things that are kind of the key aspects to town hall meetings. They promote transparency. They can support community engagement. Like we heard today by park runners, accountability. Certainly, it helps to inform decision making again by getting insight and feedback from your community. Can do other things by promoting civic participation and of course community resilience. Maybe help prioritize certain things that the city's undertaking. So some topics that were identified for potential town hall meetings include talking about or having a forum regarding infrastructure projects. When I say infrastructure, I tend to think of water, wastewater, streets, but it can certainly also mean new buildings like a new police station, a new city hall, airport improvements. We know that community development is also a pretty critical topic when it comes to especially new development, but also updating the general plan or other housing initiatives. Transportation has been kind of an issue at the forefront. We've been talking with the senior center about addressing the transportation needs of our residents. But there's a whole list of topics that I included here: budget, finance, parks and recreation, economic development. I call it kind of environmental initiatives, of course, civic engagement, and then education in schools. So based on the list of topics and kind of based on some of the things that I think council has identified as kind of priorities, put together or developed a list of 4 potential town hall meetings. The first of which I think is something we often do and is pretty critical is a city budget and finance town hall meeting. This really can serve as your budget workshop. I've identified again a list of topics for the agenda that can be certainly pared down, be more focused, but I wanted to just again be comprehensive. The second agenda for town hall meeting was focused on infrastructure and community development. Meeting number 3 was on public safety and parks. And then last but not least, the town hall meeting number 4 was homelessness, environmental initiatives, and economic development focus. I want to mention in terms of economic development, we did just have a state of the city with the chamber. Of course, our partnership with the chamber is in large part an economic development initiative, but it's also kind of a civic building, initiative in terms of bringing forward events for our community that helps promote civic pride. So I really just pause there, Chair. Just again, this was when agendized this to get kind of the feedback. So we can start planning on what kinds of town hall meetings we'd like to have or the council would like to have. So I just wanted to use this as a starting point to get your input, and then I think probably most critical is to set a date for a budget workshop, and then decide on kind of next steps with the second meeting to focus on whatever topics you think are most relevant.
Okay, thank you. Gus, would you like to go first? Sure. David, I don't care what you talk about. To be honest with you, you did a pretty good job at the town hall meeting that we did with the chamber at the senior center. Also, you picked the topics there yourself. You know what the hot buttons are. I'm not going to sit in the seat trying to micromanage you. You know that we want town hall meetings. You know what the hot topics are. So go for it. I don't know what to tell you. I don't think we should be managing, what kind of, what you want to talk about. All I'd like to see is that you complete so many a year. And the one with the Rotary should count as one. The one with the Chamber of Commerce should count as two. You know, I mean, anytime you get out there and speak to the public in a structured forum at length about city topics is fine with me. So don't beat yourself up trying to come up with 4 calendar things and bend to our wishes. You got 5 people that would like to see you talk about 5 different things. But you know which ones to do, you know what the hot topics are. So that's all I have to say today. So, and by the way, you did a very good job at the chamber. It was great, very informative.
Thank you. And, you know, kind of covered a little bit of everything on all these. And, you know, part of it, as I saw was, you know, this is an opportunity for council to, you know, part of what happens in town halls is councils get feedback from the community. And so it was, you know, opportunity for the community to have a little more focused conversation on any one of these topics. So that's why I divided it. But we could even do a workshop where we cover all the topics. It's just, there's a lot to cover.
But, you know, no matter what you talk about, there's going to be someone there that wanted you to talk about something. So just go with the hot items and,
You kind of do there, Gus. When David had sent out his first email listing these town hall meetings, the first thing I did is I wrote back or talked to the next morning and said, "You've gone way too far. You know, we don't need to have all these topics. We don't need to have 4 more town hall meetings. That's not what the council's idea was." And so I kind of went in depth to the minimal conversation that we really had with the council regarding town halls. And that I felt that a lot of it's also the fault of the council or the fault of the mayor for not asking for these as well. It's not all on David's shoulders. And so with this that he's brought up, I'm very appreciative because this is a great plan. But I think it was too much here, really. And where I don't agree, and I'm sorry, is I don't think that like the chamber or the Rotary count because it's not open to the public. And so that they're very minimized and they're structured for certain people. And I really want the open door policy on it. Do they count towards the evaluation of it? City manager? Absolutely. But do they count at the town hall for the whole public as a whole? I don't. So I think that we need to take the same thing he's doing and put it into that. Put it into a town hall for the Joe public to be able to walk in the door. When we have our normal meetings, we already have a budget meeting. I think that we could eliminate the year town hall meeting number 1. As important as that is to me, we get it 2 different perspectives. One, we do one here already, or just count. Or just do the budget workshop. We already do the budget workshop here, so it's open to the public. That's already being done on a yearly basis. The topic with the infrastructure, I think that we could almost do that one and another one combined. I don't think that one would take 2 hours. You probably, when I look at how in depth when we get here, I look at this and I say, okay, people are going to complain about and come in and talk about road conditions and the new meters and the issues that they're having with those, whatever they may be. Otherwise, it's going to be 10 minutes of you talking beyond that. But I think that we could probably take that one and include a public safety into it and turn 2 and half, 3 into one. And then we could do like a homelessness and a parks and rec one. So you end up with 2 town halls total, and that would be more than sufficient. And I think that as long as myself or whoever's mayor at the time can control the room, that these can go along efficiently and be done in less than 3 hours. And you'd have 2 of them instead of 3, or instead of 4.
So you're looking to only do 2 a year?
2 a year.
Yeah.
But because we already sit here together and do our budget workshop and get
Yeah.
the doors open for us. So
I agree with you. I think the more that we ask the city manager to do in fireside meetings, the more time we're taking away from him to do his,
and I don't do, and
his daily activities that he
And I
has.
agree that we shouldn't sit here and tell him, these are what I want to see.
Yeah,
I'm not that, because topic might change between now and June.
I think he and the mayor should decide what he's gonna talk about, not the full city.
Right now, I'd say we don't need a homelessness conversation right now. We've done a phenomenal job of minimizing it. We have a lot of help and we have the processes in order. We don't need to have that as a town hall. And if anyone wants to speak about it, they can come to our normal meeting, like our homeless subcommittee, because it can be handled in this. But like, when we talk about Parks and Rec, that's a big thing going on right now, that people like to have their input on. Or even the public safety portion, I don't think it needs a town hall, but it's a 20-minute filler that we can get a lot of information out there that you won't have questions on, or minimal. Because, she's done a great job of minimizing budget, adding to the force and things like that. That's how I see it. I mean, and if I'm wrong, please tell me.
No, I think the only thing that I always caution against is, let's not talk about something that doesn't have a possible solution. Let's talk about something where we're going to solve the problem, here's how we're going to do it. Not about paving the streets and we don't have any money. I mean.
Well, and that's why I said it should be the topic at the time.
Yeah.
I don't want to set David to say, these are what I want to see. But if, like right now, infrastructure, we're working on ways to find the money. Right. It should be something that we should put out there that, hey, look, we're trying, here's the budget. Because I get, honestly, half a dozen messages a week about roads. Maybe 2-minute long videos of people sending me driving down the streets and yelling at me, or, it's something that we could solve all in one, hopefully, and say, look, here it is, here's the video to put out on social media that everybody can see of our meeting. It says, here's how much money you don't have, The positive answer is we're giving you every dollar that we have. But I think there sometimes has to be some of the negative topics as well talked about. But the positive ones, I think we can combine them together so we have a little bit of both and do it efficiently.
What are your thoughts, David?
Well, I really appreciate the feedback. I think everyone's in agreement. We're going to get the budget workshop scheduled, so that'll help inform the budget. I think that, obviously have much performance review discussion with council on Friday, so we can, the full council talk a little bit more about what we want to build into my goals for next year or in the coming months in terms of town halls. But I understand what I'm hearing is just 2 town halls focused on infrastructure, public safety, parks and rec is kind of the key issues.
Yeah, and see, and I don't want it to limit you right here with what we're saying. And Gus said it right, that you know what the hot topics are of the moment. You can make those decisions with the mayor, whoever it is at the time, say, look, these are the things I think we should have. And we have 2 town halls a year and your normal budget workshop that we all. That's it. And it just gives the public a place to come speak and they know that it's coming.
So if I may, the last one we had was, the Vet Citrus Fair. And we had all the department heads up there. That way, anybody comes up, the question could be answered by the department head.
And I love it. So, and at this point, it could even be, the wireless mics can go around the room, make it easy. So that you can actually have people go to them instead of them having to line up or whatever you want to do. But that doesn't matter. I'm just, absolutely 100% agree that all the department heads up there, whoever can answer the question best is goes for it.
Of course, David can answer anything.
And I'm just saying, and I don't know, we even limit it. We're going to do a town hall and here's the topics that we would have open to discuss in the meeting heads for the heads of the departments that we have there.
Well, I think that's David's call, but just Chief, real quick, how was the attendance on that one we did at the Citrus Fair? I don't remember that.
It was pretty good.
Was it pretty good?
Yeah.
How long ago was that? Oh, okay.
I think that Joe Paula kind of.
It was right after Paul left. It was in 2018, I think, and it was more of a state of the city.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay.
And then that's where we had the school.
Yeah.
Where Jeremy came up.
That's right.
Spoke, the Citrus Fair director,
I remember that.
at the healthcare district. So it was kind of a broad perspective of the entire city.
What if we did one of those a year, and you know it's going to be a 4-hour meeting possibly,
Yeah.
but you do one.
You bring some pizza along, some soda, and have people come.
And you have your superintendent there, you have all the heads.
Yeah.
That we can put together. What do you think about that, guys?
Yeah, I'm fine with that too, whatever works for David.
I mean, it's definitely a bigger community forum. And, just things to think about would be, the time of year that we want to have it, the location, because we have to, look, with Citrus Fair, we probably have to pay for the reserving the space or if it's special, or Veterans Hall, either one, to have adequate space for it, refreshments.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of budget that goes into it, and I'm not trying to make it bigger than what it is, but just a little more planning in terms of, again, time frame.
Yeah, no, I'm in favor. It's either 2 a year or one big one, however you think we can best reach the community.
So we can discuss it further. I'll see how it's going. I mean, timeframes, do you have any special timeframes you would like? I mean, let's just figure it out. Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about it. Awesome. I'll leave it. Good direction, it's no direction.
All right, we'll move on to the, sorry. All right, I'll turn over to the chief.
Make it quick, Chief.
I know what I'm SRO one. All right, so, it wouldn't be history, but, so we have an MOU with the school, that identifies what they're gonna pay and what the SRO schedule would be. Trying to work outside that box and trying to get somebody in there now. So I came up with, doing it 1 day a week on overtime. So I had to do an addendum to that MOU, which is in your packet, which identifies that schedule. And they were obligated to pay the $50,000 up front before the school year starts, as it identifies in the MOU. I did the calculations and didn't think that was appropriate because he's only been there 1 day a week. So the calculation was they would pay $34.66 per hour, the officers in there. I did get with the superintendent, they agreed to that, and the schedule. So the cost, they can cover the cost currently. Our overtime budget covers the cost. I did an analysis on our last year's and year prior to what we did not spend for overtime. And I anticipated that we were gonna have enough budget this year to cover that cost, that one officer in there, 1 day a week on overtime, doing that job.
You think 1 day a week is enough?
Well, so, and I only did that because, I didn't want to, overwork the officer. I mean, he would do it 3 days a week on his own, on his days off, but that would not be appropriate for him because he would get pretty burnt out. And the cost would be, a little much. So 1 day a week, and I did that like he was going to do it 1 day every Monday for the rest of the calendar year. I know it's probably not going to be that because of vacations and things.
Right.
And so I gave him, leeway. It's not just on Monday. Maybe yes, he's doing on Monday. He can do it one of the other days that he's off. As long as it falls within their current MOU, allows them to do that. I did get what the superintendent asked them to identify a contact person so that they're not getting pulled from different schools. Hey, I need to be here this time, there, this time. Funnels through one person, they give them space to work out of, and then, they'll get their schedule done ahead of time, at least 2 weeks out. But either where I'm aware.
Which school he's going to?
correct any, but every time, you know, he's in a classroom or he's, on patrol, whatever. So, but, superintendent is on board, we're ready to move forward. I just need you to say, go for it.
And I hear with the chief, since the MOU was approved by council, typically any changes, modifications, addendums there to require council approval. And so we wanted to run this by you first, make sure that we didn't have any concerns. I think it's a workable solution until we get our officers on board. And maybe real quick, chief, we're recruiting for officers. You've got in the 5 candidates, is that right?
Yeah, so we have 4 trainee applicants, 1 lateral. I anticipate a 5th trainee applicant. I got with the next academy starts July 22nd, graduates December. My hope is to, if one of these 4 or 5 work out, to get them into that July academy, so that we can get them out on the other end, and in the FTO, hopefully by April next year, have them on the streets.
Where's the lab?
Sorry,
Where is the library?
Center of them. There's more to that story. Yeah.
So, David, this is a budget question for the chief, but I'm looking forward to potential refinements towards the end of this year that maybe we get 2 into the school rather than 1. You know, I always like to have that backup, you know. I know it's a budget restraint, but have we thought of that at all, or?
You mean 2 as it?
2 trainings. Oh, 1 time, yeah. Last time we just did 1 and we had.
On that, I don't anticipate any retirements.
Okay.
But, I'm anticipating school resource, our CSO retiring in November. She told me she's retiring in November. So I talked to Dave about alternatives on turning that into police officer position, along with doing her duties. So, but we're, throwing different ideas out there.
Now you're coming both through.
Yes.
We'll probably bring forward a proposal as part of the budget process.
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask 1 question as well, not to do with this, but we're reactivating go to lunch with police officer.
Yes.
Right. And is that all grade levels, even elementary?
It's Washington School.
Washington, no, yes, okay.
We're doing reading with the Dr. Seuss, the Dr. Seuss reading with the kids on in a few weeks here at Jefferson.
It sounds like there's support to move this forward. Chief, are you prepared to bring this for adoption at the next council meeting? So gender reports are due shortly.
Does it have to be on, it can be on consent?
Yes.
In 1 hour.
I'll give you until tomorrow.
On an updated league adjustment policy.
Okay, so just quick background, in 2017, council adopted a resolution amending the then water leak adjustment policy, which adjusted the maximum leak adjustment from $200 to $250. Since that time, there's been a number of rate adjustments. In 17-18, 3%, 18-19, 3%, 19-20, 3%, no rate increase in 2021, and then 21-22 at 6%, and thereafter 12% projected until the end of next fiscal year. Based on those rate increases, if we adjusted the leak adjustment amount from the current 250, the maximum would be in the current fiscal year 324.32, and the next fiscal year 363.24. So this was, I think, direction. From time to time, we get residents who ask for consideration on the leak adjustments. And we maximum, we provide them the maximum credit allowed pursuant to the adopted resolution in 2017. The proposed update to reflect the increases would increase the maximum rate adjustment. And so we just want to get the feedback in subcommittee, and if you're supportive, we'll bring this forward for council consideration.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to see us roll it to a round number. I think you said the first increase would be 300 and what?
324.32.
Yeah, maybe we can make it 325.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, David.
Oh, and we may build in that, allows us to, kind of do this annually. We'll work with the finance director and city attorney, so that, that way, we don't need to bring it back every year. There's some mechanism to kind of adjust the credit annually to reflect whatever rate increase the council may have considered.
Okay, thank you.
We're going into recess.
Yeah.
Great. All right, back in at 3:56. All right, we'll run through really quick the updates. Any update from other video?
There's some understanding items 1, 2, and 3. There's reports in your packet. Nothing substantial to report that's available for review.
And then under number 4, the budget, we're having a budget workshop in the near future. So I think we will have, it'll be open to the public, and we all discuss budget.
Any preference on the format? I'm assuming morning, but sometimes evenings easier. So for folks,
Mornings are best for me. The first half of the day is best for me.
Yeah, so we're saying, it doesn't matter.
Not 7 a.m. I could, but I know it's 9 a.m.-ish.
okay. And maybe like a 9 to 3 with the lunch break,
If it takes that long.
okay.
All right, we're going to, you don't have anything new on R3C or code enforcement?
We will be bringing a letter forward, a letter of support. We'll just put it in the packet. The town of Windsor is looking at developing what's referred to as a biochar facility for biosolids. And they're they are applying for funding to help with the grant funding to help with the cost of the project. And they're asking for letters of support. So we'll put that in the council packet. It's just a draft letter for your signature.
Is that different than the new facility that they have going on right now? So they just got all the ground. I wasn't sure they're different. There's a waste facility.
Yeah, I don't think they've gotten the funding for it yet.
They're different now. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And code enforcement, anything new going on?
Nothing new to report.
Thank you. Police department, you have a good one already. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Keep your eye out for the Cloverdale Connect. There's an update provided on the recent staffing promotions that were presented to council at your last meeting.
All right, future agenda items.
I have one I'd like to bring up again. It's the K9 unit. It's been a few years since we retired Jimmy. And I'm just hoping that there's some money in the budget maybe we can put that program. Chief, maybe you can tell us. I don't know who has a K9 unit other than the county right now. And I know at one point we used to sweep the high school with them at night. Maybe the superintendent would be interested in us doing that again, but I just want to see the feasibility of bringing that back. I think we give our officers a nice break. If they can get some K9 training, I know it costs us money in their salary and then upkeep of the door, but I think if we squeeze, we might be able to find the money. That's just my thought. And I don't know when you're gonna bring it back, David, it might be just something like, wait until the, budget workshop, that's what I'm doing. You know, cancel it in, see where the, next several members, yeah, it's good.
And do that prior to the budget, probably bring that back to the budget workshop and here.
Yeah, that's what I would guess.
We can handle both of those. All right, anything else? Anybody? Have to be quiet. Yep, all right.
Just listening in.
Meeting adjourned, 4 o'clock. Thank you, guys.
You'll, yeah.